In Unreal Engine, there's two templates that I think everyone who's interested in VR should know about. One is called and the cool thing about this is you open up this project and right out of the box, you can build it directly to Quest, directly to Windows, and you don't have to change anything. The other one that almost no one talks about is called. So here's what's cool about this. It works in desktop mode. It works in VR mode. It allows you to toggle between the two. There's an orbit mode, a fly mode, a walk mode. You can annotate things, you can mark them up. And it's the only template that out of the box has multiplayer. So without, getting deep into the weeds of Epic Online services or anything like that, if you build this template vanilla, just the way it comes, you can actually have a multiplayer experience with some people in VR, some people in desktop mode. You can all see each other and you have all these different ways of interacting. And it's such a good starting point for so many different things that you might want to do with an interactive experience.
Welcome to another episode of XR and AI Spotlight, a show where we give the stage to innovators, entrepreneurs, and technologists who work at the intersection between XR and AI. My name is Gabriele, I'm your host, and today with us we have Alexandre Coulombe. He is an authorized epic gaming instructor, a real engine expert, and founder of Agile Lens, a New York-based XR creative studio who work with companies and had clients including Epic Games, Intel, Dell, HTC, Magic Leap, among many others. As an architect that turned into an XR-chitect, he focuses on building virtual world and the spectacles that live within it. Today, in this episode, you will learn the advantages and disadvantages of using Unreal for XR development, how his background as an architect influenced the virtual worlds he built, the role of XR as a tool in the creative pipeline, and the challenges and opportunity for developing for mixed reality. So let's roll the title and let's welcome Alexandre Coulombe. I stumble on you, and the first thing I thought is, let me start asking the toughest question.
Oh, yeah.
Unity or Unreal for XR development?
It's a great question, and the answer, of course, is sometimes column A, sometimes column B. I came from Unity. I trained as an architect and worked in theater and all that when I was younger. So I didn't have a background in coding or game development or anything like that. Around 2010, I started to use Unity. And when I got my first Oculus Rift DK1 in 2013, Unity, of course, was a very accessible way to jump into it. But what I found was over the years, there were certain projects where they wanted the experience to feel more polished, more professional, more photorealistic. And it's not that Unity can't do those things, because it absolutely can. But by that time, Unreal Engine was much more accessible and had new tools like Datasmith, which allowed for importing, very large architectural files. And I just found that out of the box, the level of quality I was getting with Unreal Engine was much higher. Now, of course, with that, we needed more powerful computers. But anytime that I know we're working on a project that needs to have a certain level of polish, we're going to lean towards Unreal Engine, at least on our side. There are certain things that we still do use Unity for. We do think Unity still makes it easier out of the box to target a lot of different platforms. So if you want a standalone VR and AR experience and you want it to work in a browser and you want it to work on Windows and Mac, Unity, I'd say, still makes it easier to target all those different platforms. But we also just have a lot of love for all the features that we've been developing over the years in Unreal Engine. So at least for our team, we have this huge library now of everything at our disposal anytime we come into a new Unreal Engine project. And we don't have as much of that actually on the Unity side.
Right, and that comes from the experience in working with the engine, right?
Of course.
So can you maybe unpack this for us more? Like, at what cost comes that extra level of visual fidelity, right? And I'm not necessarily talking about processing power. I'm talking about backend. I mean, are there some things that you leave behind? What do you gain? Please explain, because people need to know more. They just like, oh, Unreal looks better. It's just too little.
Yeah, well, let's start with that assumption people make where they say Unreal looks better, because I do want people to understand that you can do the same thing in Unity, and there are things like the high definition render pipeline, which even out of the box gets something much closer to Unreal. One of the major things that you have is what's called post-processing. And so in Unreal, you have, and I think they call it the same thing in Unity too, you have a post-processing volume, and that's where you play with, your tone mapping and your bloom, your lens flares, whatever, like chromatic aberration, all these little things that might start to make it look more cinematic, to start to give everything this level of what just looks to the layman's eye like polish. Now, of course, the challenge of that is it does become more expensive. And because if you want to have that level of quality, you now need to go into taking things away in other ways. So you're looking for opportunities to optimize the geometry. Maybe you have a very nice looking material with a great bump map or normal texture, but then you're trying to keep it very low polygon so that, there's not as much processing on that side. There's things like draw calls. Ideally, for a desktop experience, you want like fewer than 1,000. For like a Quest experience, you'd want fewer than 150. Ideally, a draw call is every time there's like a piece of geometry and a material. So one piece of geometry with two different materials is actually 2 draw calls, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the thing that's kind of interesting right now is ever since Unreal Engine 5 was announced, you have Nanite and Lumen, which only recently have started to become more feasible for VR. And quick introduction for those who don't know, Nanite is kind of this infinite pixel level LOD system that's inside Unreal Engine, where you can have a piece of geometry that's maybe 1 billion polygons. And yes, you'll need the RAM available to kind of like hold that in memory. But from a optimization standpoint, it's actually very efficient as you zoom in and zoom out at only rendering the actual polygons that are visible. So even though there's, 1 billion polygons there, maybe it's only going to render 100,000 because that's what is actually visible based on the resolution you're at. So things like that take a lot of the technical load and just is much more artist friendly. Lumen is a real-time global illumination system that makes lighting much easier and much more efficient. So these things are great for allowing people to just be more creative and less technical, but they are still expensive, and you do still need higher end computers in order to do this in a very good looking way. And they don't work yet on totally mobile devices. Now that's coming at Unreal Fest in October. Unreal announced as part of their roadmap, like Lumen and Nanite coming to Vulkan on certain mobile processors, but it's not there yet. So, if you do want to have like a very good looking experience that's going to run on Quest, for example, you'll still find that a lot of them are still using Unity, even though every once in a while you see something like Red Matter, for example, which just has this insane level of polish and photorealism. Yeah.
I mean, incredible. And I believe also Moss, it was made on Real Engine, for example.
Yeah, Moss looks
That's some
great.
very beautiful experiences that, yeah, in Red Matter too. I mean, the reflections and everything is really like, it gives you the shiver.
Don't know how they do it. Well, I do know they use a heavily modified version of the Unreal Engine source code. And it is worth mentioning that that's a key distinguishing point between Unity and Unreal. Unity, I believe, will give you access to their source code, but there's some huge extra license fee to do that. So, 99% of the Unity users don't do that. Whereas Unreal Engine, anyone right now can go to Unreal Engine's GitHub and download all of the source code for Unreal Engine and do like what the company that made Red Matter did and heavily customize. Here's how we're doing shaders. Here's how we're baking our lighting. And it just becomes almost your own little proprietary engine, forked off of what the base Unreal Engine version is.
Right. And so I'm not a developer, right? One thing that I often hear is there is a set of SDK, for example, interaction SDK, and that kind of let's say building blocks for developers. And I don't hear very often, and might be my ignorance, that they are available for Unreal. Is that the case or not?
Yeah, thank you for asking this, because I do want to dispel this. Like, yes, Unity has all these great templates, the Interaction SDK, there's like an XR toolkit, all that stuff is great. In Unreal Engine, there's 2 templates that I think everyone who's interested in VR should know about. One is called literally the VR template, and this is an out-of-the-box template that has, your basic teleportation and snap turn and grabbing components. And the cool thing about this is you open up this project, and right out of the box, you can build it directly to Quest, directly to Windows, and you don't have to change anything. You can do that with the same map, as long as you have your Android SDK and all that stuff set up correctly. The other one that almost no one talks about is called the Collaborative Viewer template. And what's great about this template, and I use this all the time for something like architecture, but it's designed for design review. You've got a 3D model of something or a building or a car, and you want lots of people to be able to look at it at the same time. So here's what's cool about this. It works in desktop mode. It works in VR mode. It allows you to toggle between the two. There's an orbit mode, a fly mode, a walk mode. You can annotate things, you can mark them up. And it's the only template that out of the box has multiplayer. So without, getting deep into the weeds of Epic Online services or anything like that, if you build this template vanilla, just the way it comes, you can actually have a multiplayer experience with some people in VR, some people in desktop mode. You can all see each other and you have all these different ways of interacting. And it's such a good starting point for so many different things that you might want to do with an interactive experience.
Alex, say the name again.
It is called the Collaborative Viewer Template.
Collaborative Viewer Template, just if people lost it, right?
Yeah, or you might see it sometimes as just the Collab Viewer Template, so COLLAB.
Okay, perfect. Great. I mean, I think that is going to be very handy for everybody that is wanna indeed do some design review, because that is also one of the things that is done for which VR is great, right? Is be in the same space, looking at something spatially, be able to collaborate. So that is certainly a great, especially if then you can leverage the, let's say, all the texturing or the lighting, because that is also another point that is added on top of the engineering layer, let's say.
And sorry, there's one more template I forgot to mention. The virtual production template, which of course is designed for, I have all these LED walls and I'm making The Mandalorian, whatever. That is there and is absolutely made for all the things you'd want with End Display. But it also has a plugin enabled called, I believe, Virtual Scouting Tools. And that actually has another really cool VR mode where you can still be in the editor, and then you can walk around your space in VR and set up, like, here's a camera, here's a light, here's a dolly track, whatever. So all those kinds of things you might do to scout a physical location, you can then do that virtually. Okay, there's all the like out of the box things people should know about in Unreal.
Absolutely, and I think the list will be probably longer. So let's keep digging. Let's keep digging, because there is just more value to come.
Yeah.
So as we are talking about Unreal, I have a question regarding MetaHuman. So it was announced time ago. I've seen some tech demos, people making incredibly realistic faces, tracking with their phone. Have you seen products that are running it? What is the status?
Oh, good question. Yeah. Right. Like, can I think of like a PlayStation game, for example, that's using metahumans? And the answer is like, I don't think so. Not yet. I know there have been announcements of some companies that use the metahuman as like a base point and then go off and still create like very custom characters, more so like in Maya and things like that. I mean, it's worth giving a shout out to a company like In-World AI, who does have a free game you can download on Steam called Origins. And the point of this isn't so much to showcase the metahumans, which do look great, but In-World is, as it sounds, an AI plugin. And so they have this feature that we've seen, with like Skyrim and things like that, with different mods, where all these characters are organic characters you can speak to. So you have all these metahumans in the game, and it's kind of a detective story, and you can just talk to them and they respond, very organically. None of that is particularly pre-scripted beyond their personalities and, their own little like brains that you set up on the In-World AI dashboard for like, here's the things they know, here's, their personality, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. So then in this case, we imagine the MetaHuman as not necessarily, because I remember there was this plugin, or I mean, I'm not sure how to call it right now, where basically you could customize your own avatar to a level of degrees that looks super realistic, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you haven't. So when we talk about MetaHuman for this In-World, it's like a huge, let's say, an avatar that is made smarter thanks to AI, and that's what In-World does. When we look at about the, let's say, that level of polish that you get with that MetaHuman system from a real engine, have you seen that maybe in the movie industry or maybe other projects? But hey, and the answer could be no. I mean,
yeah, I mean, there's things like there's a video from a company called Blue Dot, which is a really cool showcase of MetaHuman Animator. There's some episodes of Love, Death, and Robots, which I think are using metahumans. So this is like in a cinematic context. But for anyone who like vaguely remembers like, oh yeah, I remember there's that announcement a couple years ago, build your own characters. What's the update on that? I can kind of give an answer there. So right now, if you go to, I believe, metahuman.unrealengine.com, it takes you to a cloud rendering, pixel streamed instance of Unreal Engine where you get to generate your own character. This looks a lot like the kind of avatar generators you've seen in video games. Pick the skin tone, pick the hair color, and all sorts of different facial styles, and you can then download those from Bridge over into Unreal Engine. So those characters are there, they're fully rigged, they're ready to go. They all share the same skeleton, which is great because that means one animation for the face or the body can work across any metahuman you have. So after that came out, and that core functionality is still pretty similar besides, as you went from 4.27 to 5 to 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, they've added like some bones and some tweaks. So you do want to upgrade your metahumans from the browser as you progress into newer versions of Unreal. But since then, a couple other new features have come out which are worth mentioning. One is called Mesh to Metahuman. What this allows you to do is take a 3D model of any head of any character that came from anywhere. It could be a scan you do of yourself or a cartoon character. You can then convert that into a metahuman face, which again then puts it in that sort of universal pipeline where all the animation that works for metahumans will now work for that character. The only downside to that is it does have some trouble with things like eyes, because you can get like some pretty stylized like faces, where like the chin is huge and the nose is quite large, or big ears or whatever. But the eyes always want to stay like human realistic eyes, because metahumans to start, as you mentioned, Gabrielle, were like intended to be very realistic humans. So when you start to do something more stylized, you can mostly get there as long as you're okay with the eyes still being like normal human proportion and not like large anime eyes. So then earlier this year at GDC, there was an amazing live demo for MetaHuman Animator. And MetaHuman Animator is the ability to use the depth sensor on the front of newer iPhones to not only capture RGB data, but also to get all this extra detail about what's going on in your face. And so unlike Live Link, which is a live connection between your phone and Unreal Engine, this is actually something that uses machine learning, and this data gets processed, so it just adds this incredible extra level of nuance to the performance. And you can see like all this subtle detail with like someone's eyes. They actually do a whole pass that's all about just animating the tongue correctly. And this is all done based on the audio. So it animates the tongue, so every sound it hears, like it's making sure the tongue is moving appropriately for those sounds. So that's amazing. And that's something that I've seen incredible work coming out of, indie devs, all from the fact that they have an iPhone and they're using Unreal Engine, which is free. Like it's going to cost money sometime next year, but like it's just such an embarrassment of riches that all these tools are available for us now, just to play with, and even if you're not going to do something commercial with it, like you can go and download all this stuff right now and kind of be off to the races. You don't have to go buy some $10,000 camera or anything.
And honestly, this brings me to the next question.
Yeah.
There is so much good stuff. Basically, what is the best way to learn Unreal Engine now?
You should talk to me. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great resources online. There's incredible YouTubers. I just interviewed JS Films on my podcast. I also have a podcast called the Unofficial Unreal Engine Podcast with Jacob Feldman from CoreWeave, and we chat about Unreal Engine stuff every week. But yeah, there's people like JS Films. There's people like Unreal Sensei, all these incredible folks on YouTube who teach all this stuff for free. Now, if you're the kind of person like me who learns better with live instruction versus virtual instruction, or like a video you're playing back, that's when it's exciting to check out things like authorized training centers. So these are places that have been certified by Epic to say like these people know what they're doing, and they can teach you, over Zoom or in person at a facility, for example, how to do Unreal Engine. And so especially, I'd say like ever since the Unity debacle, like I've seen a lot more demand for people who like maybe are coming from Unity and want to learn Unreal Engine. And so if you go to unrealengine.com/training, there's like a course catalog there and like tons and tons of different courses, every subject matter you could imagine in Unreal. And so like I'm an authorized trainer. I have an authorized training center. I work with a lot of really cool people who also know Unreal Engine very well. And so we go through and teach these kinds of courses. Every month, we also do a free Intro to Unreal Engine course. I think we're trying to do it the first Monday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So anyone who wants to join that can go to alexcoulombepresents.com and find out what we're up to there. But there's so many great people doing great learning in Unreal Engine. You can go to Udemy and download courses. There's stuff on Gumroad. And yeah, the forums are also very helpful. Like there's a lot of people in there posting things in the learning center of just tutorials of how to go through different aspects of Unreal. But yeah, I mean, like, go to my YouTube channel too, youtube.com/ibrews. I try to post as much stuff there as I can. I've got like a dozen videos all just teaching you like how to do different things with metahumans. So I hope all that's useful. I'm very passionate about education. Like I want as many brilliant people to have access to these tools as possible.
Absolutely. And so let's say that someone wants to find back everything that you said in terms of resources. Where should they go? Should they go to Twitter? Should they go to your website? Where can they find that?
Yeah, Twitter is still where I probably post the most like real-time stuff. Like when I'm working on a test and I'm trying to like figure stuff out. Fortunately for me, like my Twitter community is still all really good people. I haven't had to deal too much with trolls or hate speech or anything like that. So for the time being, I'm still doing a lot of stuff on Twitter at ibrews, IBREWS. Same thing on YouTube. I'm also on Blue Sky and Threads and LinkedIn and all those places as well. So yeah, I mean, that's, I'm very quick to show something that's like work in progress, like rough and dirty, like, oh, hey, we just got a thing working with like hand tracking. It's not beautiful yet, but it's a cool thing that works. Here you go.
Absolutely, and I've seen actually this experience that you built in the theater. So there was some volumetric capture dancing
Yeah.
on stage. I've tried it the other day, and it does. I mean, it does shows. I mean, okay, wait, let me backtrack. The first and most important thing is, yes, I love that you actually share everything quick and dirty that comes out, and probably something that everybody here should do. We should be less precious with our work. Expected is, oh yeah, when it's perfect, because it's never gonna be perfect.
It's never
It is
gonna be
never
perfect.
gonna be perfect. So I think that's really appreciated, and it actually was great. When I was there, I could really see indeed, like seeing a volumetric capture in VR, something I haven't done yet. So and being to be able to do that on a Quest 3 was actually really great. So that was great.
Yeah,
So
and that example, really briefly, for anyone who doesn't know, that was a test for using deferred shading and mobile HDR on Quest, which you typically wouldn't do. You would do forward shading, you would bake all the lighting. This is the typical workflow, especially in something like Unity. But if you want a certain level of quality with the lighting, if you want to use post-processing, which I mentioned earlier, all of that requires the deferred rendering pipeline and mobile HDR, which now the Quest 3 is actually powerful enough to support. So it was like a fun little test of like, here's a theater with, yeah, volumetric capture and lighting and all sorts of other things going on in there, and post-processing effects, which, yeah, normally you can't do on a mobile platform.
yeah. So we have discussed a lot about engines and technology, right? If we kind of like take a step back, right,
Mhm.
and we look instead at broader, independently from the game engine, what are some of the mistakes that you have seen teams making when developing and designing these immersive experiences?
Yeah, so did you say some of the mistakes?
Yeah, some of the mistakes, because
Yeah.
I like to you as an instructor, right?
Mhm.
As a trainer, as someone that has worked on many of these projects, I suppose that you have seen things that people do not do that well, or they could do better. And I think
Yeah.
it's a great opportunity to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with making sure you're targeting the medium correctly. And I realized at a certain point that I came into this quite privileged because having a background in architecture and theater, these are both industries that require, an understanding of space and movement through space and guiding your eye and kind of this level of composition that can't be controlled. I don't have a filmmaking background, so I do struggle more with like controlling a camera and setting up perfect composition and rule of thirds and all that. But I do often see people who are like, okay, I want to take like a film I made and now make it work in VR. And it's like, that's a tough translation because different mediums are suited for different things. Same way, sometimes there's an amazing book that has trouble being adapted to be an amazing film because they're fundamentally different mediums. So, the first recommendation I give to people is like, do kind of a first principles approach to this. Like, don't work off of anything that already exists and try to come to a medium fresh and think like, what's exciting about VR or AR, whatever medium you're going into, and how do you take advantage of that? So I'll give you one very clear example. We wanted to build a Magic Leap experience for a film festival. So Magic Leap, for those who don't know, it is an AR headset that, unlike something like the MetaQuest 3 or the Apple Vision Pro, which is using pass-through cameras, with a Magic Leap, you actually see the real world, and then there's a digital overlay on the real world. Now, there's a few limitations of the Magic Leap, because someone might go into this and say, AR, oh wow, and very broadly think like, I want to cover the world in digital content. Like, that's amazing. But the problem, exactly, as Gabrielle's showing, like, yes, you have a very limited field of view in something like a Magic Leap. So rather than saying like, oh no, it's not going to look as good as I hoped, you try to work within those limitations. So a couple things we noted about Magic Leap: limited field of view, everything looks slightly transparent, and it loses tracking if you move around too much. So we ended up designing with Kevin Leibson and Allison Morgan this incredible, I think, ghost speed dating experience where you sit across the table from someone and there are volumetric captures of these ghosts who are trying to convince you why they're the ghost who should haunt you for the rest of your life. And so what did we do? We made sure that you're seeing the ghosts from like here up, that was going to fit within, the field of view you have. We knew that there was going to be some transparency. Great, ghosts should be a little transparent. And then we got to have fun with them, like moving in and out of like solid objects. And then we made sure that it's a seated experience. So you can kind of like turn your head and the volumetric captures hold up well. And you never lose tracking because you're never moving so much that it starts to like glitch. So this was an example of like saying, how do we start from the limitations of the medium and thinking about what it's really good at, like really feeling like there's a ghost right there in front of you, and then design the experience around the pros and cons of that medium that you're working in.
This is absolutely great. The idea of a ghost that solves totally the problem of transparency. Actually, it's even more convincing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it just feels so natural. Oh, and one other fun thing we did with that too was it was an AR experience, but we prototyped the whole thing in VR. We knew it was going to be premiering at the North Bend Film Festival. We were given a SketchUp model of the actual venue it would be at. And so we actually went into virtual reality to imagine what it would be like to sit at the different tables and to do things like figure out like, okay, the tables are this big. Here's how far away the ghost should be. Here's where we're going to locate everyone. Here's where we might run into tracking issues. So, I guess the takeaway here is virtual reality is an incredible way to do previs for augmented reality.
Well, and this is, I think it's a great pun also for, as let's say, head of marketing or community at Shapes XR. Shapes XR is a design and prototyping tool for XR. And one of the things that it does indeed is, for example, it allows you to simulate that field of view for whatever headset you want. It could be a HoloLens, it could be a Magic Leap 2. And also has a custom. So if field of view will change, right, in shapes and size, so it would allows you when wearing your headset to actually look at the scene and then evaluate how big that object should be, how far it should be, so that it fit within the let's say the field of view. And also what you brought up is the value of actually being in the medium when you do the initial design and prototyping is super valuable, because otherwise you will end up with those images like sometimes you get this background JPEG with some UI in front, and then okay, this is how the experience is going to look like. And the amount of miscommunication that happens in there, it's staggering, because of course everybody has a different understanding, from the designer to the developer, the product owner, the client. So totally, I think that VR is an incredible design and prototyping tool for AR and VR first, and then for many more things. That is really what excites me and what gets me into this. So the next natural question is, when you look at VR as a tool, what place do you think it has in the design process?
I'm so glad you're asking this too, because this was something that I disagreed with a lot of people on when I first started to use this, because I saw a lot of folks advocating for virtual reality as essentially just a design review tool. Like I saw people saying like, I want to put on a headset and look around at a thing that is going to exist and then take it off and then go about my day. And there were two fundamental opportunities that I thought were being missed there. One was the opportunity to what I would call active design, or actively design from the inside out, where it's like, don't just look at what you're thinking about doing, like I make my 3D model in 3ds Max or SketchUp or Revit or whatever, and then I see how it is in VR, and then I take off the headset and go back to that. No, I want people actually making design decisions while in VR. Check to see how it feels to like pull a ceiling down a little bit. How does that change the quality of the space? change the materials in the space, change the lighting, move things around, scale things up and down, and do that in a way that is appropriate to the level of design you're at. So if you're still very early on, if it's conceptual design, you should be in tilt brush or gravity sketch, playing with these kind of napkin sketch ideas. And then as you go further on, maybe you're importing, 3D geometry and you're starting to mark it up, you're sketching over it. Maybe then eventually you're adding materials and lighting and you're pushing toward more photorealism. But like, you should always be actively thinking about what needs to happen next in the design process from within VR, not after looking at something in VR and then changing it on a computer. The second thing that I fundamentally disagree with some people on is that it's also an incredibly valid medium for things to actually happen in. Like, it doesn't just need to previs the real world. There are incredible opportunities for, architecture, live theater, some of the stuff I get involved with, to exist entirely within a virtual space. Some of the things that make an architectural space beautiful are playing on this reptile brain psychological instincts that go back to when we were, thousands of years ago, living in the savannah. And why do we like being in a big skyscraper with floor to ceiling glass and looking out? Because that makes us feel very deep in our brain like we are safe, like we're high up in a tree or in a mountain, and a predator is not about to eat us. Same thing with being in a nice cozy cabin. It feels like being in a cave. Again, you're protected, you're safe, you're secure. And so all these little tricks that we have for the architecture we build in the real world to make us feel a certain way. And this also goes to color theory and light and shadow. And I could recommend a ton of books that people should read on these subject matters. You can start to play with that in the virtual world as well and create really compelling architecture that has slightly different rules it plays by. Some of that architectural psychology is still going to be there on a fundamental level, but a column, for example, or a wall or a ceiling, they no longer need to be there for their traditional functional uses like supporting a building or keeping the elements out or anything like that. But they do have other elements because of what they evoke in us when we see those kinds of things. A big monolithic column versus a skinny one, these ideas of repetition, these ideas of space making and starting to give you a sense of how it feels to be in a certain space. Is it a tight space? Is it a large space? What's my path through it? All that stuff still applies in a virtual world. And, I'll give an example, like in VR chat, for example, there are all these beautifully designed worlds which feel architectural and, well thought out and well designed, but they, of course, could never exist in the real world. So there's a really cool opportunity to start to play with that in a meaningful way. Same thing in theater as well. Like we do this annual production of Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol every year, all live in Unreal Engine with metahumans and all that. And we are doing things that if we were to try to stage this in the real world, the show would have a $500 million budget. And we could do it, but it would be very expensive and very hard.
If you would even manage.
Yeah, and even then we're probably going to end up with half the set collapsing or something like that, because there's too many things that are really challenging the laws of physics. So there's so many opportunities for creative freedom in these mediums. And so it doesn't just need to be a previs tool. This can be the final resting point for a brilliant idea that you have for any kind of thing. And it doesn't just need to be, on the way to making something in the physical world.
Absolutely. And sometimes it is kind of still a bit tricky to sell the idea that it is rather better to have it done in VR, because the second thing that people will do, okay, can I access on the web? Can I access? Yeah, probably you could, but are you really experiencing it to its fullest? But of course, then the headset number is still not there yet, where everybody would want. On the other hand, Quest 3 is out, right? Yeah. So that is certainly a big announcement. So what is your impression about the hardware, both from a creator and from a consumer perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's start with talking about Meta, for example, because there's a lot of things to be grateful for with Meta. They've invested a lot in the hardware, in the software. The Quest 3 is an excellent headset. To develop with it can sometimes be a challenge. There are fundamentally difficult things about working sometimes with Meta's tools and SDK and the support they provide. The fact that they will release updates sometimes that will just break a certain feature. And it's I need to give a client presentation in 2 hours, and there's no way to roll back that update. That stuff can be really frustrating. I think Meta's also suffered from a lack of meaningful competition. HTC and Vive are doing some really exciting things. There's Vario and Pimax way off in the elite sector for very expensive end projects. But Meta hasn't really had a proper challenger for the consumer market yet. And it seemed for a while like it was going to be Google. I remember getting a Lenovo Mirage. This was like the next level of Google Daydream, where it was a 6DoF headset. This was like in 2018 or something like that. And I got to get this very special developer kit, which was like, oh, hey, we're also going to send you these little controllers, which are also 6DoF controllers. So this predated the Oculus Quest 1. So I was messing with all this saying like, oh my God, this is incredible. It's totally standalone. It's inside out.
It's happening.
It's happening, yes. And then when Meta or Facebook at the time was like, hey, we're going to come out with the Quest 1, it's totally standalone. I forget their code name for it for the longest time, like Project Santa Cruz or something like that. But I was like, great, I can't wait to see Google and Meta competing for our money and for our attention, to see like, who is worthy of us, because as developers, we have to pick and choose where we're going to put our time and resources. But then Google kind of just dropped out of it entirely. And then like Meta was really the only game in town. So I do think that, as is natural for many companies, that has made them a little bit lazy with some of this stuff. And there are features that do not get updated for a long time. We're talking about Unity and Unreal earlier. Like there's some features that are very well polished on the Unity SDK and work like nothing in the Unreal Engine version. A lot of stuff just lays there broken for a while. So at the very least, I'm very excited about the Apple Vision Pro and Apple getting more into the space, because even though right now the Quest 3 and Quest 3 for $400 or $500 and the Apple Vision Pro at $3,500, they don't seem like competitors right now. And yet there are a lot of things that they're both trying to do. And I'm excited for Apple to challenge Meta to do some of these things better. Things like, Apple having the gall to say like, no controllers right now. Our fundamental input system involves hand tracking and eye tracking. Can't really do that on a Meta Quest Pro right now because it's just not good enough. So by Apple saying like, we are going to make sure those things work seamlessly. And by all accounts, everyone who I know who's tried an Apple Vision Pro says it is an incredibly comfortable experience. It just works. You don't have this cognitive load of like, my hand gestures aren't working, which is something that does happen with a Meta headset. So I see like, Meta is going to inevitably take some lessons from what Apple's doing. If people start talking about how much better an Apple Vision Pro feels when it comes to things like, face tracking and eye tracking and hand tracking and all that, that's going to force Meta to up their game. And we all know that just like any other piece of Apple technology, that price is going to come down. There will be an Apple Vision Pro, maybe in 3 to 5 years, that costs $1,200, like something that starts to be more comparable with the cost of, say, an iPhone or a MacBook. So they are on the road to being fundamental competitors. And I know Meta's not ignoring that. And I hope, it forces everyone to raise their game and try to do these things better. And Apple, I need to say, like, clearly is already standing on the shoulders of all the work done by Meta and Magic Leap and some of these other companies, Leap Motion even, that have spent so many years like developing a lot of this stuff. And so Apple's taking that and like reacting to it. They're saying like, here's how all this can be better. But it does bother me a little when Apple acts like they're inventing so many of these things, where it's like, hey, like I had a little
6-7 years we are doing this.
Years ago.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things that people are doing, or let's say that both companies are trying to do, is mixed reality.
Yes.
Right. So you create content, apps, experiences.
Lots of them.
Would you suggest developers, creators to invest in mixed reality? And if so, to what extent?
Yeah, it's a great question, because for me personally, and there's plenty of people who disagree with me here, mixed reality has not been that compelling yet. And the problem fundamentally has to do with pass-through. I don't think even the Quest 3, which has much better pass-through than something like the Quest Pro, I haven't seen the pass-through at a level where I would comfortably want to be in that for a particularly long time. I'd rather have an experience that's entirely virtual, or I'd want to have an augmented reality experience where I still do actually see the real world. And it feels more nauseating too. Like the fundamental enemy of VR since the beginning of, the 1980s VR has been, how do you not make people feel sick? And mixed reality adds this whole other thing that can make people sick, which is the distortion and the idea that like the world almost feels right, but it kind of wobbles in the periphery and it's distorted. So that to me doesn't feel great right now. Mind you, I will also be, I get a whole day with an Apple Vision Pro at the end of the month. There's going to be a dev day or a few days here in New York City. So I'm going to have 6 hours, and I'm probably not going to be allowed to talk about it, but I'll have 6 hours with an Apple Vision Pro to, work on apps and whatnot with it. And I really, really, really hope that the pass-through feels good enough to me that it's like, yeah, I could keep this headset on for, 3 to 5 hours. Maybe I'll keep it on the whole 6 hours. Who knows? Like that to me would be a fundamental step in the right direction for making mixed reality compelling. Because I know the Apple Vision Pro originally was going to be AR glasses, and they just found, due to physics constraints, like you can't get the field of view for AR to be as big as anyone would want. So I know at some point the devs had to go to Tim Cook and be like, hey, so sorry, we really can't do AR
Real
glasses.
world doesn't work like that.
Yeah, but we can do really good pass through, and like I think that they had to have a fundamental like benchmark for like this is how good this is how good the pass through needs to be for it to qualify for the original vision that I'm sure Tim Cook was pushing for when they first started working on this. I don't know, 6 years ago or however long it's been.
Yeah. So let's wait and see from
Yeah.
that side. And I do have one last question, Alex, and that is, I've seen what I was doing and seeing what you have been doing over the past year, that you qualify yourself as an XR dad. And I do also curating a blog, I think some time ago, about how it is to introduce your kid. I have seen a son, I think, to VR, and I remember still myself putting the original HTC Vive for a couple of minutes and having my son play Beat Saber, and
Yeah.
impressed at the performance, at the results. So how is that change for you, for your son? Is still in it? Do you still introduce him to that? How did it evolve in time?
Yeah, so two sons actually. So I've always
Okay.
tried to keep different podcasts going over time. So the podcast I had before my unofficial Unreal Engine podcast was called XR Dad, and all those episodes are still there. I think at xr-dad.com. My friend Logan Smith and I would trade back and forth doing little experiments with like Google Earth VR or like a Halloween Magic Leap app and things like that, and showing what our kids' reactions were to these things. And it all came from that fundamental place of saying like, I see that there's tremendous educational potential in these tools, and I want my kids to be able to take advantage of those. And I've seen it happen too. We were talking earlier about really wonderful Unreal Engine games made for standalone. One of them from Inner Space VR is called A Fisherman's Tale. So when my kids were very, very young, A Fisherman's Tale was one of their favorite VR games. And then another Fisherman's Tale came out recently, and we got to beta test it, which was very cool because my 5-year-old at the time, I have a 6 and an 8-year-old now, so he was 5 at the time, and we were given all these warnings about like some of these puzzles are really difficult. Just so you know, like don't feel bad if you need to ask for help on them. We'll give you a save file that jumps you ahead of them. And I put my 5-year-old into this, telling him to like, hey, don't get too frustrated. These puzzles, like grown-ups are getting stuck in them. And he would solve these puzzles. He would solve these puzzles that like involve really complicated, like, you're throwing your hand and then you're controlling your hand moving around and it's going through these mazes. And while that hand is doing this, this hand needs to do this. And you need to throw your head over here. So these like really complex spatial puzzles, and my kids can solve those things now. And I guarantee that is only true because of the fact that I started putting them in VR when they were 2. Now, something I want to be very careful about telling people is like, just like any kind of screen experience, you don't want to treat this as a babysitter. You don't want this to be the kind of thing where you leave your kid in a VR chat world for 3 hours and say like, they'll be fine. Like, no, they won't be. Don't do that. But if you do this in a very curated way and you show your kids very particular experiences and you're talking to them about it, and you're drawing something in Tilt Brush and then they draw something, or you're solving things together because you can cast to like the phone and see everything going on. If it is that kind of very interactive, I want to just say like a play session, they learn so much from that. And there's so much benefit to it. And it exercises parts of their brain that I don't think any medium can touch right now. It's so tactile in a way that, like Legos are tactile, but you can never build Legos that are the size of New York City. And yet you can do that in VR.
Absolutely, and I think it also, of course, when they're gonna grow up, they're gonna do whatever they want. They might hate it, because that's usually what happens. But at least us as parents, we are trying our best to expose them to whatever it is that we also like. Let's be honest,
Yeah.
and then one day maybe something that we are gonna be able to share.
And the same way that you would want to teach your kids, a foreign language, so they're bilingual or trilingual, and then that opens up all these other corners of the world to them. I'm also trying to teach my kids just the fundamental basics of like good VR design. Here's how to use Unreal Engine. Here's how to use Fortnite Creator, that kind of stuff. Because regardless of what kind of profession they might go after when they're older, I just see the utility that having these tools under them are going to have. If one of them grows up to be a plumber, great. Like they can go ahead and have 3D models of pipes, and like they're going to get something out of that and starting to like test things out in a VR environment. If they become a game dev, an architect, marine biologist, whatever profession they could possibly want to go after, there is a foundational utility to these tools. So I feel very privileged to be able to teach my kids these things, and anyone who has access to these tools, this technology. I also encourage you to please do like start letting your kids dip their toes in these waters, because the same way that it used to be, you'd always say like all your kids should learn how to code. Like we're starting to do that with some kind of new ways, and in some ways like things like ChatGPT make it so like you don't need to know how to code as much, because like it helps you out so much there. But having these foundational design principles, you could say, and knowing how to use these tools in I want to say a holistic way, where you see how blueprints and 3D modeling and lighting and Fortnite or whatever, how all those things connect to each other, that's really valuable in my opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Alex, I wanted to thank you very much for this insightful conversation. We covered a lot of ground, so thank you very much for let's say unpacking a reel for us, as well as many other topics. So thanks again. Is there anything else that you would like to tell to the people that are listening?
We are very proud of this production of Christmas Carol that we do every year. I mentioned it briefly earlier. We treat it as kind of a sandbox. So the first year we did it with Actors Theater of Louisville. It was a hybrid production. It happened in a physical space as well as in, the virtual world of Unreal. And every year we start to add new features, try out new things. For example, the first 2 years, our actors had to use Live Link Face, now like the MetaHuman Animator app. And so they would do facial capture that way for their metahumans and everyone would see them. Our actors felt like that was great, but it also made them feel kind of detached from their audience. They couldn't see their audience. So then we've developed a method for taking all the facial tracking data from a MetaQuest Pro and bringing that into MetaHuman. So that means our actors can actually look around the space, see the other audience members, and get all the fidelity of that facial tracking. We're also playing with AI. We have a whole AI onboarding session. We're playing with puppeteering and all these other kinds of things, where even if someone did see our production of Christmas Carol last year, it's a whole new ballgame this year. So I'd love for people to check that out. Let us know what you think. Tickets will be on sale soon. You can go to xmascarolvr.com. So Christmas, but xmascarolvr.com. And hope to see you there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much, Alex. Very appreciated. Good luck. I see that you are there on site. It looks like, so I'll let you go.
Yeah, this is for a project in March. Also check out inkandpaint.live. This is for the show that I'm in this space for, written by Stephanie Riggs, really talented. Everything. Check out her book, The End of Storytelling. So, anyways, we could keep talking for another 3 hours. We'll have to do a part
exactly. So let's do this, guys. Everybody that is here is gonna follow Alex because on Twitter, because that's apparently where his community lives. Go there so that you can get updated when other projects come up, and you can let's say keep track of it, because this, otherwise we would never end up.
It all moves very fast. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alex. It was a great talking to you.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.